It was a hot August night in 2007, and Amy Winehouse was driving through a narrow road in rural Mississippi, somewhere between Memphis and nowhere. She was not supposed to be there. Her tour manager, a pragmatic Londoner named Derek Shaw, had plotted a clean route back to New Orleans, where the next show was scheduled in 2 days. But Amy, who had never been particularly fond of clean routes, had spotted a turn and taken it without warning, the way she did most things in her life. Derek gripped the dashboard. "Amy, this is not on the map." "Most interesting things aren't," she said, not taking her eyes off the road. She was 23 years old, and at the strangest crossroads of her existence. Back in England, Back to Black had sold millions of copies. She had won 5 Grammy Awards earlier that year, a record for a British artist. Her face was on every magazine cover in the Western world. And yet, sitting in that rented car with the windows down and the Mississippi heat pressing against her skin, she looked less like a global superstar and more like a young woman who was genuinely profoundly lost. Her beehive hairdo was slightly undone from the wind. She wore a vintage dress, black, because she always wore black, and her signature eyeliner had smudged at the corners. She was not drunk, which was notable in itself. She was just quiet, which was rarer still. The road curved and opened into a small clearing, and that's when she saw it. A low wooden building with a tin roof, a single bulb burning above the entrance, and a hand-painted sign nailed to the doorframe. The letters were old but legible, black paint on pale wood. "Colored only." Amy slowed the car to a stop. Derek looked at the sign, then at her. "Amy." She didn't answer. She was already reading it a second time. "Amy, that sign is probably older than both of us combined. It doesn't mean what it used to mean. And even if it did, this is not the place for a white British pop star to make a political statement at 11 at night." She turned off the engine. Through the lit window of the building, she could see silhouettes moving, hear the distant murmur of voices, and the faint sound of a jukebox playing something slow and real. "I'm not making a statement," she said, opening the door. "I'm hungry." Derek let out a long breath. "Of course you are." The door of the diner had a small bell attached to the top, and when Amy pushed it open, the bell rang with the kind of lightness that felt almost inappropriate given what followed. The jukebox was playing Etta James. The room held maybe 15 people, all of them black, seated at small tables and along a wooden counter, worn smooth by decades of use. A ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. The smell was extraordinary: fried catfish, cornbread, something sweet and dark that might have been peach cobbler. Every conversation stopped. Amy stood in the doorway and felt every pair of eyes in the room land on her simultaneously. She was aware, perhaps more acutely than she had ever been in any concert hall, of how completely out of place she looked. Small, pale, tattooed, with her half-collapsed beehive and her smudged eyes, she must have seemed, to the people in that room, like a creature from a different planet entirely. Behind the counter stood a woman named Rosie Mae Tatum. She was 61 years old, built like someone who had spent a lifetime carrying things that were too heavy, and her expression when she looked at Amy was not angry, not afraid, but deeply, unmistakably unwelcoming. She set down the dish she was drying with the deliberate calm of a woman who had handled difficult situations before. "This establishment," Rosie Mae said, her voice carrying easily across the silent room, "has been serving this community since 1954. You can read, I imagine?" "I can," Amy said. "Then you saw the sign." "I did." "And you came in anyway." Amy didn't flinch. She had grown up Jewish in North London, in a household where arguing at the dinner table was considered a form of affection, and she had spent the last 5 years being screamed at by music executives twice her size. She was not easily intimidated, but she was also not, in that moment, combative. She looked at Rosie Mae with something closer to genuine curiosity. "I came in because it smells like the best food I've encountered in 3 weeks of American tour food," Amy said. "And because I've been sitting in that car for 4 hours and I needed to stop somewhere that felt like somewhere." A man at the counter, somewhere in his 50s, with large hands and a careful expression, said quietly, "You know who that is?" He was looking at the young man beside him, who was squinting at Amy with dawning recognition. "That's that singer," the young man said. "The one from England, Amy something." "Winehouse," someone else said from a back table. Rosie Mae did not look impressed. She looked, if anything, more guarded. Fame, in her experience, was not a reason to bend the rules. It was often a reason to enforce them more firmly. She had seen what happened when the rules bent for the wrong people. "Miss Winehouse," she said, and her voice was careful now, precise. "I have no quarrel with your music, but this place exists because 60 years ago, people in this community had nowhere to go. Every diner in this county had a sign on the door that said they weren't welcome. My father built this room with his own hands so that there would be one place, just one place, where our people could sit and eat without being made to feel like they didn't belong on this earth. That is not something I am prepared to set aside, because a famous person is hungry." The room was completely still. Even the jukebox seemed to hold its breath. Amy listened to every word. She did not interrupt, which was not always her tendency. When Rosie May finished, Amy was quiet for a moment, and then she did something nobody in the room expected. She pulled out the bar stool nearest to the door, the one farthest from everyone else, and she sat down. Not aggressively, not as a challenge. She sat the way someone sits when they are asking to be allowed to stay. "You're right," she said. Rosie May raised an eyebrow. "Everything you just said is right," Amy continued. "And I'm not going to pretend I have some clever argument for why you should let me eat here. I don't. Your father built this place for a reason, and that reason was real and serious, and it still is." She looked down at the counter for a moment, then back up at Rosie May. "But I want to tell you something, if that's all right. Not to change your mind, just because it feels like something I want to say in this room, to someone who might understand it." Rosie May studied her. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I grew up being told I didn't belong in the music I loved," Amy said. "Not because of my skin, but because of my voice, my look, my whole way of being. The industry wanted something tidier, something easier to sell. Every producer I met in the early days told me I needed to be something different from what I was. And I kept thinking, where is the room where I can just be what I am? Where is the room where the music I feel and the person I am are actually welcome?" She paused. "I know it is nowhere near the same thing. I know that. What your community survived and what I went through are not in the same universe. But when I walked in here and felt that this was a room built so that people could be exactly who they are without apology, something in me recognized that feeling. The need for it." The man with the large hands at the counter was very still. The young man beside him had set down his fork. Rosie May had not moved from her position behind the counter, but her posture had changed in some small way that was difficult to define. She looked at Amy for a long time. "My grandmother used to say," Rosie May began, her voice softer now, "that a person who has known any kind of locked door can understand the weight of a key." She was quiet for a moment. "I am not saying your door and our door are the same door. They are not. But I hear what you are telling me." From the back of the room, an elderly woman with silver hair and reading glasses pushed down her nose spoke for the first time. "Rosie May, let the girl have some catfish. She looks like she hasn't eaten a proper meal since London." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the room. It was small and tentative, but it was real. Rosie May looked at the elderly woman, whose name was Miss Claudette, and whose opinion had carried weight in this community for longer than most people could remember. Then she looked back at Amy. Something in her face resolved itself, not completely, not without reservation, but enough. "You sit where you're sitting," Rosie May said, pointing at the bar stool by the door. "You eat. You don't make it a story for the papers." "I don't talk to the papers," Amy said, which, given the state of her relationship with the British tabloids at that time, was the most earnest sentence she had uttered all evening. What followed was quiet and unlikely, and by every account of the few people who were there and ever spoke about it, genuinely beautiful. Rosie May brought Amy a plate of catfish and cornbread and a side of collard greens, and Amy ate with the focused, unself-conscious appreciation of someone tasting something real after a long time of eating things that were merely functional. She didn't perform gratitude. She just ate, and the honesty of it seemed to matter to the people watching. Derek had come in eventually, sitting on a stool near the door with the resigned expression of a man who had accepted that his life was going to be permanently surprising, and Rosie May had brought him a plate without being asked, which he received with genuine and visible emotion. As the evening settled, conversations began to resume around them, cautiously at first, then more naturally. The jukebox cycled through its selections. The elderly Miss Claudette, it turned out, had strong opinions about the relative merits of different Etta James recordings, and Amy had even stronger ones, and within 20 minutes the two of them were in a spirited disagreement about a specific album track that drew in two other customers, and eventually Rosie May herself, who leaned against the counter with her arms folded and a reluctant smile on her face. At one point, a young girl of about 9 or 10, the granddaughter of one of the regulars who had been sitting quietly in the corner, crept over to Amy's side of the room and stared at her with unblinking intensity. Amy stared back. "Your hair is very big," the girl said. "I know," Amy said. "I can't help it." "It looks like a hat," the girl said. "But a hair hat. That might be the most accurate description anyone has ever given me," Amy said, entirely seriously, and the girl smiled the enormous smile of someone who had said the right thing and knew it. Later, when the food was finished and the plates had been cleared and the jukebox had gone quiet, Amy sat with a cup of coffee and looked at Rosie May, who was wiping down the counter with the methodical patience of someone who had done it 10,000 times. "Can I ask you something?" Amy said. Rosie May looked up. "The sign, are you going to keep it?" Rosie May considered the question for a long time, the way she considered all serious questions, from the inside out. "My father put that sign up as a declaration," she said finally. "Not of hatred, of survival, of the right to exist in peace." She glanced toward the door, where the painted wood was just barely visible in the light. "I don't think I'll take it down, but I think I understand, a little better than I did this morning, that what the sign is meant to protect is not a wall. It is the feeling inside this room, the safety, the belonging." She looked at Amy directly. "You didn't threaten that feeling tonight. You might have, but you didn't. You sat down and you listened, and you were honest, and that is rarer than people think, whether they are famous or not." Amy nodded slowly. "I've spent a lot of my life not being particularly honest," she said. "Not on purpose. I just couldn't figure out how to be what I was without it alarming people." She smiled, and it was a sad smile, but a true one. "Music was the only place where I could just say things exactly as they were." "I know," Rosie May said simply. "I've heard your music." Before she left, Amy asked if she could leave something. She had found a paper napkin and a pen, and she had written on it in her careful, slightly erratic handwriting, "For Rosie May and this room, which smells like the best thing in America. Thank you for letting me in. AWU." Rosie May folded the napkin once and put it in her apron pocket without reading it in front of her. She extended her hand, and Amy shook it, and the handshake was brief and firm and completely genuine. Outside, the Mississippi night had cooled slightly. Derek was already at the car. Amy stood for a moment on the gravel, looking up at the single bulb above the diner door, which buzzed faintly in the warm air. She thought about the rooms that exist to protect people, and the rooms that exist to exclude them, and how sometimes from the outside they can look like the same thing. She thought about Rosie May's father building this place with his own hands because the world outside it had decided his people were not worth feeding with dignity. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen in Southgate, which had always smelled of something cooking, and how that smell had meant safety in a way she had never been able to explain to anyone. Amy Winehouse got into the car. She didn't say anything to Derek for a long time. He had the good sense not to ask. She died 4 years later, in 2011, at 27. In the years between that August night and the end of her life, she returned to Mississippi twice more, both times finding reasons to drive that particular road. The diner was always open. Rosie May was always behind the counter. They never made the news. After Amy's death, Rosie May spoke about her only once, to a local journalist writing a small piece about the community center that had since opened in the building next door. She said only this: "She came in here one night a long time ago, and she sat down and she listened. That's all she did, but sometimes that is the whole thing." The napkin is still there, framed now, on the wall of the community center, next to a photograph of Rosie May's father, standing in front of the original building in 1954. The handwriting is slightly faded. The words are still clear.